Good evening. This is the day that the Lord hath made, and we ought to rejoice and be glad in it. What a blessing it is to be in the house of the Lord just one more time. We are so grateful that you have joined the online Bible study of the Mount Pleasant Baptist Church, located at 2516 Squirrel Hill Road in Herndon, Virginia. Tonight we conclude our summer series on dealing with life in the midst of a pandemic. Tonight we're looking at a changing church. What does the church look like, not only in the midst of a pandemic, but even post-pandemic, when all of this is over? The question that we have tonight is, what is the church going to look like? I'm grateful tonight that we have been joined by pastors from all over the DMV who have come to talk with us and discuss with us this so important question on a changing church. We have with us Pastor Denise Wilson of the Rock Church, Pastor Lucius Dalton of the Mount Moriah Baptist Church, Pastor D. Mitchell Ford of the Renaissance Baptist Church, Pastor O. Jermaine Bego of the Center Point Baptist Church, and then we have Pastor Justin Rhodes of the Trinidad Baptist Church. On behalf of the entire Mount Pleasant Church, let me thank each of you for coming and joining with us tonight. If you are watching by Facebook or YouTube, we're going to ask that you would please share this video with your friends, because I believe this is an important question that as the church moves forward, we must really deal with what the church is going to look like in such a different world, in such a different society. Let us pray. Oh, gracious God, we thank you, Lord, for allowing us to come tonight and just have this discussion, oh God. We thank you for these pastors that have come to join us tonight. We pray, oh God, that you would just continue to bless and each and every one of them. Guide our conversation, oh God. We thank you in advance for what you shall do. In Jesus Christ's name we do pray. And all God's people said, amen. I've learned that the coronavirus, COVID-19, has really fundamentally changed how we do church. Since, I believe, the third Sunday in March, we have been strictly online with our Sunday morning worship, our Wednesday night Bible study, all of our church meetings and all of our ministry has been done online. It was interesting. Our church did a survey just to find out where the mind of many of our members are. And it was amazing to me how many people have just kind of made up in their mind that they don't know when they're going to come back to the church physically. As pastors, that's something that we have to deal with. We have to understand that we have members who will not come physically back to the church. And the question is how do we minister? What does the church look like in this changing world? I was reading earlier the words of Jesus in Matthew 15. It says, "You hypocrites, Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules." Listen, those of us who grew up in the traditional church and where everything was about the old traditions of the church, we got to understand that that day is past, that we've got to be willing to make change. We've got to be willing to go along with the change. Jesus says, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. To do what I've learned more than anything during this time is if you're really going to do ministry during this time, it's going to take a heart for God. There have been times when I was doing Bible study. We used to do Bible study live when we first started this. I was doing it from my house. Several times the internet went out. One time my computer died. And it was nerve-wracking. It literally bothered me because in the middle of my Bible study, everything went dead. And so what I've learned is that if we're really going to be the church in the midst of all of this, in even post-pandemic, we can't just play church anymore. We can't just say church anymore, but we've got to have a heart for ministry. We've got to have a heart for people. And that means we have to do whatever we need to do to make sure that we are reaching the people of God. And so we're going to go around the circle now, and I'm just going to ask these pastors, what do you think is the most important issue when it comes to a changing church? And what do you think the church looks like now in the midst of a pandemic and will look like? I'll start with Pastor Bego.
Well, I would say that we are 7 months into this global health pandemic. And the reality that we must come to terms with is that there is no going back to the way that things used to be. That this sense of normalcy that we experience does not exist anymore. And so in light of this COVID-19 health pandemic, we must begin to look at the new normalcy of wearing gloves and masks and hand sanitizers. We must begin to understand that there are churches, businesses, and schools that are closing in our midst. And we must not shy away from the reality that even as of today, that there have been some 152,000 deaths in the United States alone that have been reported due to COVID-19. So for the churchgoer, the pastor, the practitioner, to engage in conversations, it is to understand that we are in the midst of change. Everything that we have done has changed. How we worship has changed. How we do Bible study has changed. How we collect offering has changed. How we do communion has changed. How we do baptism has all changed. And so this notion that the church must remain the same is not the reality that we find ourselves in. It is what does or how does the church respond in the midst of this global health pandemic?
Pastor Rhodes?
First, let me thank you, Pastor Donaldson, for including all of us in this conversation. I think that what Pastor Bego says is certainly true, but I also think that we are having to confront the real fallout of what this has meant for not just our members, but ourselves, dealing with the anxieties and dealing with all of the emotional fallout of confronting the reality of church, unusual, the reality that we can't embrace as we are accustomed to, the reality that we cannot engage as we once have. And I think that it is certainly critical in this season for us to really begin to focus more attention on assessing the real needs of our people. And one of the things that I think we can become accustomed to, and we have become accustomed to, just kind of thinking we know how to do church. But in a pandemic situation and even in a post-pandemic reality, we're going to have to be more connected to our people like never before, I believe, because we have to sense really the needs of folks where they are now as a consequence of having dealt with this. our seniors having to live as they do, many of them having to have people run and get groceries for them and things like that now that they had not previously had to do, all kinds of anxieties and things around this whole situation. And so I do think that we have to be very much mindful of the ways in which this pandemic and the even the considering the reality of what it will look like after all of this is over, the impact that has on us from an emotional perspective.
Pastor Dalton?
Thank you, Dr. Donaldson, for this opportunity and this privilege to come to share. I too believe that the church will no longer be the same. This pandemic has opened our eyes to so many things, and one of the things that I think it has done is that it has challenged us on how we not only care for our congregations, as Pastor Rhodes has said, but how we care for the communities that our churches reside in. Dr. Donaldson, you talked about having a heart for God. We still have to spread the message of Jesus Christ. And the message of Jesus Christ cannot be compromised, but the question becomes, how do we do ministry that shares with others the good news of Jesus Christ? And so I think that in order for our churches to survive in this pandemic, we cannot just look inward, but even more importantly, we got to look outward. We have to minister to our community and do the things that are necessary in order to promote the cause of Christ. Another challenge that I think we have is, especially when it comes to the issue of church growth, how do we assess that our churches are growing? I know we have counted bodies in the sanctuary. We have counted Sunday attendance, midweek attendance. But how do we, in this digital age, not only count bodies, but how do we count fingertips as well? Because persons are engaging online and in social media. How do we measure the growth of our churches, and how do we come to a conclusion of whether or not our churches are being impactful in our communities? So we also have to think about this whole notion of what we call worship shifting, and I think we will get into some of that because the way we do worship has shifted. I believe that it's shifted for the better, but that shift will continue, and it's unfortunate that it's taken a pandemic for us to switch or to make that switch in worship. And basically what I'm talking about, from going inward or in-house centered to outward centered, or a combination of both, being inside the sanctuary as well as doing social media. The pandemic has forced so many churches to do that, and that has, I believe, been a good thing. So I look at this whole notion of evangelism during the pandemic, post-pandemic. I look at how to measure church growth, and I'm also looking at this whole notion of worship shifting.
Okay. Pastor Wilson?
So let me first echo, thank you for the invitation to be here with these like minds. As I was listening to everyone, I totally am in agreement. But one of the things that bothers me about the conversation a little bit, not this conversation, but the conversation that we have with our church members, is that at one point we thought that our church services were normal. And church services should never be normal. So now, as we're talking about new normals, I think we should be talking about better normals. Because as I can only speak for myself, but pre-pandemic, I know that people were coming to church as a routine. People were coming to church to get the check mark off. And we were able to hide behind the fellowship. The pandemic has forced us to now have more of an intimate relationship with God because of the quarantine. We don't have anybody else to talk to. He's forced us now to make him the main thing again. And so I believe that social media has helped because as pastors, we've been able to get the word out more, but also our congregation has not the excuse for the bedside Baptist anymore, because everybody now is at the bedside Baptist, but they're getting the word not only from us as their pastors, but they're getting the word from more people. And I do believe that's a good thing in the long run, because when we come back, now that God has dealt with us in our secret place, now we're able to now be the true worshipers that God has called us to be. And now our programs that we had in the beginning, pre-COVID, I agree with you, are now going to be more community goal-oriented versus in-house goal-oriented. So I'm looking for the better normal.
Okay. Pastor Ford?
Thank you, Pastor, for having us here and participating in this conversation. So, for me, I think a great part of the ministry is going to be how do we keep the multi or intergenerational attention from the youngest to the eldest as we move to the different platforms we have to move to. Most of us think of primarily either Facebook Live, YouTube Live, or conference call, which is what we do at our church, because most of our members are not Facebook literate. They're not online literate, really. And so for some of them, we have to have members call them so that they could be on the call. And so our congregations and churches are really going to have to become more like broadcast houses. And our ministries are going to have to be have tentacles on multiple platforms of reaching people. Many churches experienced it or experimented with it for Vacation Bible School, where they had different classes going on all at the same time. But with people being in different places, it created some interference and noise that we're going to have to learn how to filter out in order to be effective at discipleship, at fellowship. You know, for fellowship, our church, we do Zoom calls because people miss each other. You know, for a lot of our members, church was the constant in their life. You know, other than being at home, going to church, seeing their close friends who were church members, being engaged with people. And for some people, that was the only human touch they received all week. And now that that's taken away, we have to figure out ways so that our family life ministries, our discipleship, evangelism, our community life ministries, as well as our worship can be more engaging than just watching or viewing as a spectator, but to engage the whole person in a way that keeps them connected to Christ and the community of faith.
Okay. Thank you all. Pastor Rhodes, you talked about the anxiety of people during this pandemic. And yeah, we do want to remind you that if you have questions, please just put your questions in the bar on either Facebook or YouTube, and we'll be glad to answer your questions. But you talked about anxiety. How have you been able to deal with the anxiety, not only just your anxiety, but during this time, how have you been able to deal with the anxiety of your members? Because there, you know, as I said, one of the things that I learned about from our survey And last night our church had a town hall meeting by Zoom. And the reality is a lot of our people they still have a lot of anxiety about this. Especially with the numbers, the way they're going in our country, instead of going down, really, I think over the day, we had over another 1,000 people died here in the United States just today. And here we are all of these months into this. So how have you been able to deal with that anxiety of your membership?
So one of the things that God really led me to do in the midst of this was to have a mental health professional actually share with our congregation. On Sunday morning during worship, she was the featured speaker for that day, because it was very clear to me that these kinds of things, if I'm dealing with the stressors of this, then there are other people who inevitably are dealing with those as well. The other thing is that this season has called us, I believe, to a level of engagement and pastoral care like we've never seen. We're doing it perhaps a different way than we might have in the past, but and you all would probably agree that this season has caused pastors to have to engage with members even more and more intentionally. I'm finding myself calling more members. I'm doing all kinds of engagement, from the social media platforms to the phone or whatever the case might be, FaceTiming and all of those kinds of things, really just trying to give the membership a sense of stability, a sense of comfort, whatever I might be able to afford them, and my presence and my sharing with them might be able to afford them in that way. But it really does, I think, require of us in this moment to be definitely intentionally engaged with our members. Certainly, and I think that we sometimes, perhaps in this time, think that it is, well, the older members that we have to be most concerned about and things of that nature. But I think really it's across the board. It's not really limited to the senior generation or anything like that. And I think that with particularly some of our younger people, our younger people, our children, are dealing with some great anxieties around this as well. So definitely been trying to really just be more available to our members in that way.
Anybody else have something that you've done to help your members with anxiety during this time specifically?
Well, for our church, we do we call Friday Night Live, where everybody will come into Zoom, and I ask them, how are you doing? And they will tell us what they're going through, what they're dealing with, and what we're finding is that everyone is dealing with some of the same things. So it's a good thing for us to know that we're not in this by ourselves, and that we can be a comfort for each other. So the social platform Zoom has really helped us to make sure that we're still hands-on with all of our members.
I want to add that there's a significant difference between pastoral care and pastoral counseling. Mm-hmm. And as pastors who provide a level of care does not make us qualified to provide counseling. And we need to be sure that we make that distinction, because people of faith will run to the pastor before they run to a healthcare professional to deal with the trauma or the anxiety that they are experiencing during this pandemic. And so one of the things that we've decided at Centerpoint is that we will partner with another congregation who has a mental health ministry organization and begin to refer out people to that ministry. And these times is not about, are you sending them to another church? Are they going to go to that church? We all stuck at home. So, if they watching them on Facebook, then they're going to watch them after they watching me. I don't care, right? But it's to understand that we all are dealing with a degree of trauma, and we do not have the appropriate outlet. So even in mental health counseling, they can't go sit in front of a counselor. It's still telemedicine in some degree, whether it's virtual through some online medium or it's through a telephone. But what I've discovered that the seniors in my congregation are lonely. They just want somebody to talk to. And they will ring my phone, all day long with nothing important, but you know what it is. They're stuck in their home, and they're alone, and they just want to hear a voice.
Yeah, and I so agree with that. I had a discussion. We have a pastor of seniors here, and she was telling me the other day, we want to be safe and we want to be healthy, and she was saying, but Pastor, some of them have literally been in the house for 5 months. They literally have not left the house. Everything that happens to them, that groceries, medicine, somebody goes and gets it for them, and they have not left the house. And that's a difficult thing. When you think about it, to have to just be able to, and I told somebody, I don't know what we would have done during this without social media. Imagine if we didn't have social media during all of this time. But many of them are not on social media, and they don't have those means of interaction. And so it's important to make sure, like you said, whether it's trying to get a mental health professional or it's members of the church just reaching out, because there are and it's not just, as you said, it's not just the oldest. Our youth pastor, one of the things that she does is she really has stayed engaged with our young people, Bible study weekly, and they meet. And what she has found is that there's a lot of anxiety amongst our young people. Some of them missed out on graduation. They missed out on this. They missed out on so much. And it's a difficult time for people. And the church, somebody else, we talked about meeting needs. It's no longer us deciding what people's needs are, but we've got to put ourselves in a position to meet the needs of people where they are. Pastor Dalton, you talked about our worship and how we do worship, and I think that's an important part of this. This time dealing with the pandemic, even now and post-pandemic. I think how we do worship is something that we're going to have to look at. As and we've been preparing to eventually, I don't know when it is going to be, but eventually come back. But one of the things that I said is that we won't be able to continue just having church the same old way. Even now, while there's not a vaccine, we're limited in the number of people we can have. There are all different type of steps that we have to take. What do you think is the biggest issue that we have to look at when it comes to worship in the midst of a pandemic, when we talk about that change?
I think that the bottom line is, how do we remain relational? We are relational people. And one of the things that I thought about was, how do we remain relational when we're not able to come into the sanctuary? And even I told the congregation on Sunday, a couple Sundays ago, when I was given the benediction, I went upstairs and I was in a major funk, because it dawned on me that I hadn't seen the people that I pastored in 3 months, 4 months. I missed seeing their faces. I missed the amens. I missed the interaction. I'm a relational person. I'm a pastor. I like being around the people that I serve. I think the challenge for us is how to remain relational during the pandemic and post-pandemic, and how do we remain relational on our social media platforms. I think that is going to be a key. For me, that means a shift in staffing. I think post-pandemic, we're not going to need all of the people in our church offices that may be responding to telephone calls. Well, we're not doing too much of that anyway. Emails, et cetera, et cetera. I think we're going to have to make a shift from the actual office to more ministry persons in our audio-visual ministries. Mm-hmm. I'm talking specifically about chat rooms and putting questions in chat rooms that would challenge people to respond, and asking questions and putting points from sermons in the chat room, and getting people on social media to engage with one another to sort of build this relationship piece that we're talking about. So how to remain relational in the midst of this pandemic and post-pandemic, because church would never go back, or worship would never go back, in my opinion, to the way that it was. And if churches do go back to how church used to be, those churches would not be able to survive.
And I agree with you there, because, you know, as I was saying earlier, the reality is that many of our churches, even when the church decides to open back up, there are still going to be a good number of people who are going to stay online or by call. And we still have to, in the midst of worship, see, I think some people think, okay, we're going to open up our doors and get back, and we're going to forget about the online, but that can't happen, because we're going to have so much of our congregation who are going to be online that we still have to have that engagement. Literally, you are going to have to. That's one of the things that we've been encouraging. Each Sunday we have a minister who is responsible for being on either the YouTube call or the Facebook call, and it is their responsibility to engage people. So when people say something, they have that responsibility. That's something that and we've been doing YouTube for years. We've been doing Facebook for years. We really never engaged people like that, when we had those different avenues. But now we have to.
A couple of other things, and I don't want to dominate the conversation, but that is going to be a must. That's going to be a must ministry position, whether we call it a relational minister or social engagement minister or digital minister. We're going to need that in order to remain relational, because the reality of it is that some folk just ain't coming back, period. I think we have to realize that as well.
Pastor Ford?
That's what I was saying when I talked about church becoming more of a broadcast center, because so many of our members, and back to Dr. Dalton's how do we measure church growth account, who's involved in our congregation, is going to change. It's not going to be based on geographical locations. You're going to find that you have consistent, regular people attending your online worship who live in different parts of the country and engage the church in other ways from those same places, so that we're not limited now to our local DMV area, but we'll have members who are in West Virginia and in Louisiana or further down in Southwest Virginia, who will be engaged regularly and want to be ministered to as though they were local members of the church. And so that's what I mean when I talk about we have to devise ways to fellowship even over the social media platforms, whichever ones we choose. And you can't be singular in it. You know, you have to do YouTube, Facebook. You have to do conference call for people who don't do YouTube and Facebook, you know, and online streaming services. So it's going to require a whole new way of looking at how we reach people, how we stay connected to people, and how we help people to grow in their relationship to Christ and others. And it's going to require a whole staffing team, not one person, for the online relationships.
For the second time in 5 months since this pandemic, I am tearing down and rebuilding the church's website. So when the pandemic initially hit, we rebuilt the website for our members to be more engaged and interactive with our Bible studies and prayer calls, and created a prayer wall and praise wall on the website for the members. Because the thinking was, this too shall pass, right? But this is going to be 2-3 months, and we'll return. But our online presence has grown so. And looking at the longevity of this pandemic, we're now tearing that down and rebuilding the website for a more global audience. And so this new website is going to take every aspect of the church and digitize it. So there's going to be a welcome center for visitors. There's going to be a new member orientation where they'll go in and watch pre-recorded new members class. And at the end, they will then get a digital new member certificate, no matter where they are, right? We're going to have members globally because of the digital age that is upon us. Everything that we do in the church will now be done online. When it comes to communion, we'll send out 12-month supply of communion cups and wafers to members so they can have it and they can engage with us every first Sunday for communion. Because the reality, as has been discussed, is that even when we re-enter the sanctuary, we can't lose sight of all of those we have evangelized to in a digital age, whether it's Facebook or YouTube or IG. The other thing that we decided to do is to meet people where they are, particularly our youth. Our youth are not on Facebook. Our youth are not on YouTube. They on other social media platforms, and we have to catch up to where they are, right? And so when I look at COVID-19, I don't want to take the position that this is a result of COVID-19. What I see is that COVID-19 has shed light on where the world is going, right? Where society has been shifting to gradually. COVID-19 has sped it up. Mm-hmm. We have already been a society that's been antisocial. We build houses with no windows on the side. We live in communities and don't know our neighbor's name. We drive into our parking lot. If it was an emergency, if we needed sugar, we couldn't go next door because we don't know the people. So we've already moved there. The church must find a way to still offer to the world something that it does not have. Not just Christ, but relationship. How does the church find a way in this digital post-pandemic age to offer something that the world does not have in Christ and also in relationships?
Pastor Wilson, you talked about that church had, in a real sense, was just kind of routine, that people checked off a box. We know that now it's not necessarily a box that's being checked. People, as you said, everybody is bedside Baptist right now. How can we reach people beyond surface? And that's what I like to call it. To a lot of people, church was surface. It was just something that you did. But now we've got to do it's one thing to get them to look at your broadcast. You can get, there are a lot of people who, click on, if they're your friend and they come across, they may click on your broadcast. But what can we do to really get people and reach them and keep them even in the midst of all of this?
Well, I think that prior to the pandemic, we were preaching to what we felt was our congregational needs. But I think now we have to preach more to what our world needs are, because we're being social media killed. Every time you turn on the television, we're seeing social injustice. We're seeing, our schools, our kids are not going back to school, so we're dealing with parents now having to work from home with their kids in the other room. So I think that what we need to do is talk more about the values of the church, but reaching the world versus just dealing with the 100 people that are in our congregation. We have to speak to the needs of our community, speak to the needs of what's going on in our nation, and speak to the needs of what's going on in our world, so that we can stay engaged. Because, I preach to the Rock on Sundays, but I have to realize that the Rock is not the only church that's listening to me. And we also have to realize, as we're talking to the people that are engaged with us, we have to keep pushing that the church is not the building. The church is the individual. So as we're ministering to the needs of the individual, it's going to go past our church. So I feel like that's where we are as pastors right now, to stay engaged with not only our church, but the church.
Pastor Rhodes?
I do want to say something as well, because I think that it's very important for us to understand that what is required and what will be required of us in a post-pandemic church, whatever that looks like, is not simply a repackaging of what we already do and putting it online. I think that these times call for tailored approaches to the realities of what folks are dealing with. And so it cannot simply just be, let's do all of the stuff that we used to do, but just put it on Facebook. Let's do all of the stuff that we used to do and just put it on YouTube, or let's do it on Zoom, or whatever the case might be. We've got to really be thinking about intentional ways for us to be the church contextually, because all of this now really is calling pastors to think contextually about what it is, to Pastor Wilson's point, and as has been raised by others, what are the specific needs of our people? How do I engage in a relevant way that really connects with people where they are, even though they're at home watching me? The reality is that for many of us, and as pastors, we will be, because of this kind of global nature of where the church is going and where the world is, quite frankly, we will find ourselves being considered spiritual leaders for folks and spiritual care providers, quite frankly, for folks all over the country, all over the world. But that requires something of us too. And so when we talk about the individuals who will have to engage with people online and the people who will have to be on the social media teams and doing the things that are necessary to engage the individuals who watch our broadcasts or who are on our virtual platforms, we also have to be mindful of what is going to be required of pastors in this season as it relates to being touchable even around the world like that. I personally, have folks now who are not a part of our church, but who consider me as one of their spiritual leaders or whatever. And so that is going to continue to evolve as a new norm post-pandemic.
I like what you said. We can't repackage the old and just because we're online now, we just go repackage what we was doing before and put it online. That's so true. One of the things I've been doing, even as I kind of evaluate our worship, online worship, and how we do things, I've been looking at other worship services, and I was watching one particular worship service, and literally they were doing everything they did before the pandemic, and after a while, I couldn't even take it anymore. And I clicked it off, and they had probably it looked like they had about 30-something people who were watching. But when I went back, and by the time the preacher had got up, there were like 3 people online. And I was thinking, the reality is when you try to get people like that, they're not going to sit and watch our churches for 2.5 hours online. We have got to look at what we do, and we've got to do some new things. We've got to be willing to say, you know what? And even when we come back, whenever that comes back, because the reality is we still are going to have that strong online presence. I told our church that when we come back, our goal is, if we have 2 services, our goal is to have no longer than an hour. That's it. 2, we're not going over an hour. And we can worship God and we can do what we got to do, but we're going to do it within an hour. Because, it is I think that's a part of the change. And, it's not only just to engage, but it's also, you have the health issues, people are already nervous. People are already scared. We want to come in, have a good time, worship, and go home and not do what we've always, and just go back to doing stuff because, we always did it and we can't do it now. One of the things that I told my church that I said, listen, y'all get ready because even we're not dressing up for the foreseeable future. And nobody loves, my suits and ties and all that more than me, but listen, this is a different day. This is a different day. And I told him, I said, even for the Lord's Supper, you need to pray that out of you if you got a problem being casual for the Lord's Supper, because even for the Lord, we cannot, I like that. We cannot just repackage what we were doing before and talk about that, because that's the change that people are looking for. We got a few questions. We do have a few questions. The question number 1, there are a lot of non-Christians who are now hurting and in need. How can our churches take advantage of this opportunity to reach out to community to assist them and share the good news of Jesus Christ at the same time? Dalton, that's kind of what you talked about a little bit.
Yeah, I think, and that's a great question. I think churches partnering with community organizations is a must during this time. We had a gentleman, Maurice Cook, who reached out to us, and he is the founder of Serving the City, and he asked us about being a part that would help to collect food that could be distributed to the needy in the Capitol Hill area. And so I readily said yes, there was no question about it. But what we have done is that we have gotten the congregation engaged in that too. So not only do we have neighbors who are dropping off food, but we also have disciples of our congregation who are dropping off food. And through that partnership, persons who are needed in our community are getting fed and getting the basic supplies that they need. So I think partnering with community organizations is a must. We don't have to do it all ourselves. Partnership is important. And Pastor Bego was absolutely correct. It's not just us preaching Christ, but it is what we call in our church mission demonstrating the standard of Christian living. We have to demonstrate it, and one of the ways that we can demonstrate it is through community partnerships in which the community can participate, but also the community can benefit as well.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to what I talked about at the beginning about we're going to have to search our hearts. Like I said, it's no longer just enough just saying church. Even Jesus, everybody who says, Lord, Lord, is not going to enter the kingdom. So we really have to search our hearts and look where our hearts are. And do we really have a heart for our communities? It's one thing to say you have it, but do you show it? Is it in your, in what you do? Pastor Ford?
Yes. One of the things about engaging in the community is not just at the level of need, but the follow-up and follow-through after that initial touch or engagement. In Dr. Dalton's example of someone needing food. Well, there are some conditions that exist around while they're in that place. And the church has to partner with other service agencies and other ministries, quite frankly, to see if there are wraparound services that we can help this family or help this person get out of the situation that they're in that requires them to need food, in that instant. It may be something as simple as job training and, a new job, but it may be more than that. It may be something mental, emotional, where they need other services that's going to help them to stabilize their lives so that they can then stand up again and be fully human with their own agency.
The second question is how do we become a community without communing with each other? What do you think becomes best practice in engaging with each other in our new world? Pastor Bego?
I would say that this is a season of not right and wrong, but trial and error. Mm-hmm. We simply don't know. I mean, we've never been here before. Mm-hmm. And so we have to be honest in saying sometimes, just don't know. I don't know what new communities look like because it hasn't been done. Now, if you want me to answer based upon what we've done in the past, then I can repackage it and I can give it to you. But this is a season that is stretching us. I talked about the fact that 152,000 people as of today have died because of COVID-19, and that's only been reported in the United States. But guess what? People are still dying of heart attacks. People are still dying of strokes and other medical conditions. People are still dying because of accidents. And so as pastors, how we even minister to grieving families has changed. And so there's no right or wrong. We just have to go and try to figure it out. But we must first create a sense of community, right? Between brothers and sisters of the cloth. So that we now can learn from one another, right? This isn't competition, right? This isn't threat or ego driven. This isn't arrogance, right? It is, I need to know what you're doing, right? I was so proud of the fact that I go online and I see you have a video. And the first thing you say is, I'm not saying we coming back to church next Sunday, but if the time comes, this is what it looks like, right? And the first thing that comes to my head is Pastor Donaldson and Mount Pleasant Baptist Church need to be on a national level talking about their strategy, because I have not seen that from any other church. And so that's not fear or intimidation. It is giving the information to give us a process, a foundation of how we figure out what works best for us in our own new community.
And that's so true. I've had a couple pastors, good friends call me. We first put out our letter, kind of our re-entry plan. And I had a couple call me and said, Doc, do you mind if I take that and I fix it and put it towards my, absolutely not. Listen, and that's one of the things I think has really made us kind of all, realize during this, that whole ego thing amongst preachers that we have, that day is gone. I mean, there probably are still going to be some who have it and do it, but the reality is, because I don't care who you are, I don't care if you somebody who has tens of thousands, you know what, you in the same boat as the rest of us. You ain't been back in church since March either, and all of us, I don't care who you are, all of us are struggling. Now, different people struggle different ways. But the reality is all of us are struggling, and all of us, one of the things is I'm hoping that this allows us the opportunity, as you said, to be able to share with each other, to not worry about, whether somebody's taking my members, and not worry about somebody's taking my idea. No, we passed that. I think that's one thing that has made me, if I see something that somebody else is doing that I think is going to work, you know what? I'm going to use it. I'm not worried about, I'm not worried about who's getting the credit. I'm trying to be the best that I can be for my church and for the kingdom. And if we all would just get there, if we all would get to that point, I think we would be so much better off. We have another question. Pastor Rhodes, I'm going to ask you. The question is, how can the church reach across global borders? How can the church in this age reach across, how can we become a more global church?
I think becoming a global church requires us to not have a small gospel. We talked about, and the pandemic has really leveled that playing field in a lot of ways, because everyone is virtual, everyone is doing things on virtual platforms. But I think the reality is that for many of us, we've got to have a global gospel. We have to really reduce, and I think this pandemic has stripped us of the gimmickry and really pushed us to having to be gospel centered. And part of that really is an understanding of the fact that God gave and loved the world. And in this time, in this season, if we are going to be effective, we've got to be thinking far beyond just ourselves, beyond our local community, not to the exclusion of our local communities, but thinking on several different levels, being in our community, being on a national level, being on a global platform. And I think that it really is, it takes us being really deliberate about knowing and sharing in a way that speaks to where people are. And I think that we're communicating now in a sense, in a way that we have the platform now. The stage is set for us, and it really becomes pastor, leader, even from the members' perspective. How do we devise strategies really to carry this message, to carry a message that is not a black message, a white message, an American message, even with as bastardized as the gospel has become in America, but carrying the message beyond our own cultural understandings, making the gospel beyond culture, taking the gospel beyond culture, if you will.
Yeah. Pastor Wilson?
I think that to answer that question, we have to already acknowledge that we are a global church because of social media, because of we don't know who is listening to our message. Obviously, it's not just our church members that are listening to our message. So I agree with my brother that our messages have to meet people in their individual needs. And those needs are not just in our congregation, but everybody is dealing with something. So we are the global church. So as we are ministering, that's how we have to minister. The same issues that we're dealing with here in the United States, they're dealing with them in Russia. They're dealing with them in India. They're dealing, depression is not here, just here. It's everywhere. So we minister as if we're ministering to the global church already.
The last question, this is a good one. How can we expect God to do a new thing in the church if the church won't release the old? Anybody want to take that? How can we expect God to do a new thing in the church if the church won't release the old?
That's easy. We can't. We simply can't, because in the gospel it says in certain cities Jesus didn't do much ministry there because of the thinking of the people. When they brought the blind man to Jesus, he took him out of the village so that he could minister to him away from the mindset that even if he was healed, he would still think he was blind, because that's the only way people saw him. In order for God to use the church needs to be available for God to use it.
And I read Matthew 15 earlier, and we've got to it said their teachings are merely human rules. We got to talk about, tradition versus truth. What is our truth? And if we can stick to the truth, and there's some old things that, listen, and people who know me know I'm as traditional as anybody. I can be as traditional as anybody. But when it's about the kingdom of God and it's about building the kingdom of God, we cannot continue to put new wine in old wineskins. We have got to make up in our minds that we can't hold on to the old, that we have to begin to do, now Pastor Dalton said, we'll never compromise the gospel. The gospel will never get compromised, but we have got, because if you don't, it's funny. I can remember specifically, maybe the last couple of years, I can specifically remember hearing pastors say, I'll never be on Facebook. I'll never do live. I'll never have I'll never stream my service. No, they got to come to church. If they want to hear me preach, they got to come to church. That same pastor was, anybody can help me set up a streaming service? Because if you don't, what was he going to do? He was going to, literally, he was not going to be able, and I think some people thought this was, and some people fought it for for a month or so, because they did not want to adapt. They did not want to let go of our old way of thinking and our old way of doing things. And I just believe that, that if we're going to be who the Lord wants us to be, we've got to make up in our minds that we've got to open up our hearts and minds to receive, even if it's different, even if it's something we've never done before, even if it's something I don't know much about that. We gotta, and this comes to, we talked about staffing. It comes to, you gotta have people around you who have the heart for ministry. That is good. That is the one thing that as we move forward, we can't have position fillers. We can't have people who are just there for titles. But in a changing day, in a changing church, we've got to make up in our minds that, listen, you have to have a heart for ministry, because this is different. This is new. This is a different way. And we're trying to reach that global crowd. We're trying to, you talked about the intergenerational. You've got to come up with something. It's not, well, we're just trying to reach the young people. We're just trying to reach the old people. No, we're trying to reach everybody. Right. And we have to do things. We have to come up with things to do where we can reach all who come, all who want to be a part of our services. I want to have a moment of honesty here, if you will. What has been the most difficult part of all of this for you as pastors? What has been the most difficult part for you as pastors? Pastor Dalton.
I read very early in the pandemic where a pastor said that he had worked more in 4 months than he had in the last 4 years. And I believe that is absolutely true. For me, the hardest part has been adapting and attempting to adapt in a world that has been changing and moving so fast. And those adaptations will continue into the near future. And so that has been a challenge for me. An addendum, I know you didn't ask this, but an addendum is that it has been good because it has taught me what is essential and what is not essential. Not everything we were doing was essential. Not everyone who was doing it was essential.
Yeah.
And so I know Dr. Ford and I, we had this conversation, but it has taught me that the people that I need to surround myself around in ministry are people who have a creativity that is beyond my scope.
Pastor Wilson, what has been the most difficult thing for you during this?
I think the most difficult thing for me during this pandemic is making sure that nobody slips through the cracks. Extroverts don't have a problem telling you what's going on in their life and having you help them solve their issues. Introverts don't want to talk about it. Most of the time, they don't even want to face it. So having to be the one to do the reaching out is probably been the most difficult for me, just to make sure that I can't touch them, but I need them to know that I'm there. Mm-hmm. So that's been the most difficult thing for me, just making sure that they're okay. And as we've alluded in our conversation, the people that have come on board since social media, and now they're looking to you because they are now thinking that you're their pastor, and now you have to also make sure that they're okay because they may not have had a church home, and you don't want to miss the mark and miss the person. So those have been my challenging issues, just making sure that I can stay available.
Pastor Bego? What do you think has been to you the most challenging aspect of all of this?
I think I'm going to answer the question personally. It has been mental overload. It is the amount of thinking that has gone into this pandemic that has caused stress and anxiety. It is what Pastor Rhodes spoke of earlier. It is the aspect of self-care. Knowing that you have people that rely on you that you cannot touch. Members of the congregation who need you that you don't know how to serve. And as a pastor, as a shepherd, it is in this season, it's the 99 that are lost. You got hands on one. It's the reversal of tax. It is the 99 others that you cannot touch. And the heart of a pastor is to always be with their people. The shepherd, to be with the flock. And I think that keeps me up at night. And that is the challenge. How do you remain authentic in your calling in this season?
Pastor Rose?
I'll say for me, it has been the greatest difficulty or challenge in this for me has been the fact that I am 7 months into pastoring our church. And so kind of getting my arms around what pastoring the church is and feels like has shifted. Pastoring has shifted, certainly, and everyone acknowledges that. But my personal reality really was that I got 2.5 months of quote unquote normal pastoring, and then the world changed completely. And so kind of reorienting myself to, okay, what I envisioned as pastoring, we know the world is going to change. We know that there will be shifts around us, but this has certainly accelerated those things in a way that I could not necessarily have envisioned.
Pastor Ford?
Actually, for me, the hardest part of being a pastor during this pandemic is ministry to the sick and grieving, having members who have died because of COVID-19 and not being able to minister to them. One, I had to have the doctor call me and FaceTime me with the member so that I could have prayer with her. And another member died, and we couldn't do our regular bereavement care ministry with because we can't be in close quarters anymore. And so adapting how that's done through phone calls, through Zoom, FaceTime, those are the things that help, but it's still different from being able to be there and to touch. So that's been the hardest part for me.
I think for me, the hardest part has probably been just the uncertainty. I mean, from day to day, the uncertainty of it all, from each aspect that you're talking about, from the simplest thing of worship. One Sunday we were getting ready to start, and something happened with our system here, And so we had to push back, and here it is, you know how it is, you kind of getting ready for worship, and then all of a sudden, we get that 5-minute countdown and we can't go live. Or we can't do what and we know we have people who are watching, and then you begin to think, well, are they not going to come back next Sunday? Are they not going, because there are a lot of people out there, and so I think the uncertainty, as I said before, the Bible study of shutting down, of cutting off in the middle of Bible study, the uncertainty of how we going to do funerals. I can't even know the number that, we've had to do certain funerals. We're going to have 1 million memorial services when we get back. I remember, that's what I've told all the families, well, we're going to have a graveyard service for right now. And maybe when this is all over with, we can come back and we can have a memorial service. We're going to have a memorial service every week. It's just the uncertainty of everything, even the uncertainty of when we're going to come back. We've done the work, we've done the video, we're preparing, we've even set some dates, but we don't know what's going to go on. We've talked about if there's a spike in Virginia, we're not coming back. If the governor says no, you can't, we're not coming back. So I think the uncertainty of everything has really just been my biggest thing in all of this is just, not knowing, what's next. When is the next, who would have known when we started all this that the whole George Floyd thing would happen? Who knew that when all of this started, that in the midst of a pandemic, we would also have another national pandemic, with this issue of police brutality and issues like that. The reality is we've had to shift our preaching. We've had to, because we have to talk about because the people need that. And so we've had to shift our preaching, we've had to shift our teaching, we've had to do so much. And so thank you for that, for those transparent answers. We're going to begin to wrap up. I want one more question. I kind of want to go around the circle and ask, what are you looking forward to the most post-pandemic? What are you looking forward to the most? And I'm not even talking about necessarily just right when we come back, because, when we come back, it still won't be, I'm talking about, say we finally have a vaccine. What are you looking forward to the most? Pastor Wilson, what are you looking forward to the most?
I think what I'm looking forward to the most is collective worship, in a nutshell. I know I have my private worship, but I can't wait to run around the church with my members and thank God for what he has brought us through.
Pastor Dalton?
I think it's similar to what Pastor Wilson said, the ability to be able to physically touch and to see those I pastor. I believe that it is when I'm able to do that I will be able to breathe and rest.
That's 4.
I pretty much agree with both the previous responses. Real worship with real people who have been delivered.
Pastor Bego?
You mean real deliverance? I want to see that my greatest fear is not reality. And that is that the absence of touch is not the new norm. I want to prove my fear wrong, that we'll be able to embrace one another once again.
That's Rhodes.
For me, I think the thing I'm looking forward to most as we come out of pandemic is being able to really celebrate the fact that the challenges that we faced as a result of the pandemic were really opportunities for us to evolve into who God really needed us to be in this season. The pandemic certainly presents unique challenges for each of us as pastors, for us as Christians even. But my greatest my greatest hope is that once we come to the other side of this, we'll be able to celebrate and rejoice over the fact that the challenge that was presented to us did not overwhelm us, but was an opportunity for God to reshape us and to form us into who God really needed us to be to serve this present age.
I think that's, and Lord knows, I'm going to miss. I can't wait to come back to worship and come back to, I think we had 2 mission trips that have been canceled because of this, and to do missions again and all of that. But I think my greatest excitement is to come back and see a new church not doing things the old way, but kind of going back to what I started with, a church with a true heart for the Lord, really wanting to serve God and all this other stuff, so oftentimes that pulls us down and hinders us from being who God wants us to be. My greatest prayer and my greatest hope is that we would understand. And I was telling somebody, and this is not even just for the church, but even our organizations, our conventions, our associations, my greatest prayer is that we just won't go back to doing things the same old way. That we will have seen the need to evolve and adapt and be who, not what we want to be, but be who God wants us to be. And so that's what I'm looking and hoping and praying for. Listen, let me thank each of you for coming out and sharing with us on the night. Pastor Justin Rhodes of the Trinidad Church, and Pastor Bego of the Centerpoint Church, Pastor D. Mitchell Ford of the Renaissance Church, and Pastor Dalton of the Mount Moriah Church, and then, of course, Pastor Wilson, who's no stranger here to the Mount Pleasant Church, who her church came out of this church, amen, the Rock Church here in Virginia. And we are just so grateful for each of you. Thank you for giving of your time to come out and share with us on tonight. To the members of the Mount Pleasant Baptist Church, once again, we thank you for being with us on tonight, and all of our guests. We are just so thankful. We've had a wonderful 5 weeks talking about dealing with life in the midst of a pandemic. We've talked about leadership. We've talked about social justice. We've talked about finances. We have just had a blessed time in the Lord on these 5 weeks. And so let me thank each of you and all of our panelists who've been here the last 5 weeks. Let me thank you all for sharing with us. To Mount Pleasant, we want to remind you this coming Saturday at 10 a.m., we are having our volunteer training. When we come back into the church, if you would like to volunteer, we're asking that you would please go on the Realm and sign up for the training so that we can know exactly who it is that will be here on that day. And then also we do want to remind you that August the 3rd through the 7th, we will have a week of fasting and praying. We'll fast each day from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. We'll have our noon prayer service, and then we'll pray by Zoom by our prayer conference call each night at 7 p.m. We are just trusting and believing that God is going to lead us and guide us in the right direction and give us the wisdom to make all of the right decisions. Good evening. God bless you. See you on next week.